Six Sight shares the stories of the people with passion and drive who make things happen in the world. Here's your host, Howard Fox.
Hello, everybody. This is Howard Fox for Randy Ford. This is the Success Insight podcast, and I want to welcome you today for a very interesting episode. As many of you know, or perhaps you don't know, I'm a big fan of the platform LinkedIn, and it is a platform for professionals like ourselves to essentially network and network professionally. It's an opportunity to present ourselves, our brand, create content, and I'm very excited today to introduce you to a colleague of mine all the way from Edinburgh, Scotland. I'd like to introduce you to David Petherick, otherwise known as Dr. LinkedIn. David, welcome to the Success Insight podcast.
Thank you very much, Howard. Great to be here, and thanks for the invitation. I certainly appreciate it.
I love the moniker Dr. LinkedIn, and that is also your website as well, Dr. LinkedIn. How did this moniker come about?
Well, it was actually something I was struggling against it for a while. I've been writing LinkedIn profiles since, quite some time ago, since 2006, in fact, when I was introduced to the platform in 2005, and then just towards the end of the year. And then a colleague of mine was in touch to say he was struggling to kind of write, the story of what he did and get it across to people. He just wasn't quite happy with it. So he said, you're good at writing. You can help me with that. Because, I was mainly doing copywriting at that time. And that's where it started. I rewrote his profile for him. And a couple of weeks later, he recommended me to someone else. And I basically invented the service at that point. I was also doing a similar thing for some other platforms at the same time. But I quickly focused in on LinkedIn, and that was the main area of it. But as I was saying, the kind of fight against the Dr. LinkedIn was simply me thinking, rather foolishly, it was a little bit cheesy. It was a little bit kind of tacky, Dr. LinkedIn. But I had a chat with a colleague who's actually based in the UK as well. And he basically said to me, hey, David, you're missing a big opportunity here. If you're a doctor, then, you can write prescriptions, you can perform surgery. You could have, other specialists and other doctors. You could have nurses. When he said nurses, that was, that got my attention all of a sudden. I was thinking, hey, it'd be quite nice to have lots of nurses around. I took a look around the kind of landscape of what other people were doing on LinkedIn and, how they were packaging themselves. And, Dr. LinkedIn was clear blue ocean, really. And I think one of the things that struck me straight away was the fact that there's a great simplicity to it, really. You say doctor and you say LinkedIn, you understand what a doctor does. A lot of people now understand what LinkedIn does or what its potential is. So they understand that, you come to a doctor for help, for advice, for, if something's not quite right, you'll say, hey, doctor, maybe you can help me with this. So that's where the name started from, was, it was in the back of my mind for a while, but I was fighting against it, thinking that doesn't quite work. But last week I was in Ireland, in Cork, talking on stage with a white coat and a stethoscope. And, people get it. They understand it quite clearly. And the doctor idea runs through all sorts of different services that I can provide, whether it's just helping with a profile or whether it's general advice in terms of how to approach LinkedIn. People trust doctors. And that's, it's stuck since then. Since about a year and a half, 2 years ago now, when I basically set up everything with a domain name, the website, and started to use that as my overriding brand. And it's fun. People understand it. They like it, and it opens doors for me.
It's a wonderful story, and I truly appreciate the, what you've shared. I mean, when you and I first met, I don't recall if it was because of the Dr. LinkedIn. I definitely recognized you as one of the, and I dare I say, leading contributors and thoughts around what is LinkedIn's potential, how should we be using, how do we use it wisely, appropriately, and get the full potential out of LinkedIn. So having the doctor LinkedIn, what goes through my head is here's your prescription. So, we look at LinkedIn profiles, we talk to our clients about what their goals and objectives are, what their struggles are, and then we literally can write them a prescription. So I love how you're using that. I'm curious, you had mentioned, you had been doing some other copywriting. Had the proficiency with writing that certainly has informed your success as Dr. LinkedIn, what other writing had you done that really kind of helped you to somewhat, I don't know, ease into this or to move into this space? Because it's a very broad space. People do a lot of different things, but you're able to also assist them in communicating what their brand is.
I think almost everything, since I started writing when I was interested in kind of the process of writing and when I was at school. And I went to university in Edinburgh, and I was studying English literature and language. And I also got very interested in writing for the student newspaper, which was a weekly production. It was 24 pages, as far as I recall. And I also was quite useful in that I could also take photographs, so they wouldn't have to send a separate photographer and journalist to cover things. I came as a 2-in-1 package, as it were. I enjoyed doing that a great deal. And the essence of it still is about telling stories, finding out the facts, distilling it down, and then deciding what's the headline, what's most interesting, how do we illustrate this visually. And so the process of, writing a story for a student newspaper isn't radically different from the process of writing a profile. You've just got to think about editing it down, focusing on the most important factors, and telling the story in a way that I suppose makes your, the subjects understandable or legible. And also you've got some sympathy for the people that you're writing about. Certainly I do, when I'm writing profiles, because they're often in a situation where they're trying to change something, they're maybe trying to get a new position. And they recognize that sometimes they're not the best person to write about themselves. They may be very good at writing, and they may be very good at what they do professionally, but they suddenly have a mental block when it comes to thinking, how do I describe myself? And it's that point at which they realize that they recognize that, maybe some professional help would be useful. I also was writing a lot of, let's say, advertising material. When I left university, I started my own little agency, in effect, doing a lot of copywriting. A lot of it at that time was for print. This was in the kind of late 80s. So, we hadn't really heard of the internet or websites. That was still some way away. But what people wanted to do was to present themselves, again, in the same professional manner and bring across the values of their business or them individually. It's just that the medium was slightly different. It was going into print in those days. And obviously that, has changed and evolved since then. I actually started writing coding websites in 1996, when most people really didn't know what a website was. They hadn't really heard of it. It was a novelty, extreme novelty. And these were the days where, finding stuff on the internet, there was no Google. There were things like Yahoo, and there were things like Alta Vista and various other different search engines, which, a lot of them have gone the way of the dodo since then.
Right.
But the landscape changed, and I realized that having the technical skill of being able to create websites was fine. It was in demand. I made a good living for a couple of years creating websites where I wasn't really controlling the content, but I was just giving them a framework into which they could, put their words or images. But I realized that in order for a website to do its job properly, the element of storytelling and the elements of editing were still just as important. What I was doing evolved more as time went on into helping people decide what goes where, what to prioritize, and then, helping them to actually write it effectively. Because writing for a website it's not radically different from anything else, but you have to consider things like search engines. In other words, what do you put in your headline so that the search engine can find that, and how do you structure it technically? And so I suppose, evolving that into a situation where you now look at LinkedIn as a, an online tool. It has the same similarities in terms of, yes, you've got to write a good story, you've got to make it interesting, and you've got to edit down. But also you've got to think about it technically to some extent in terms of the structure, the headline, the job titles, the way that you describe things in certain ways, the skills that you put in, and the priorities that you give information. So it's kind of been an evolution, but it's just been the same process has always applied from my point of view of just being interested in telling a good story. Mm-hmm. And the technical medium has just evolved from being a print newspaper to being, a kind of static website where you didn't have any social media at all. And then now it's moved along into a completely different beast. It's evolved so quickly since, I remember I was looking through some back images of what the LinkedIn website used to look like. And in 2005, 2006, I think it was, the image of LinkedIn, they had the logo, it was still there, but they were advertising the fact that you could reach over 5.5 million professionals, which at the time it was like, hey, look, all these people I can reach online, fantastic. But, you switch to 2019, you've got more than 610 million professionals on LinkedIn.
And so, growing.
Absolutely growing at, I think the rate is still roughly 2 people a second. Since we started this conversation, a lot of people have joined LinkedIn.
Right.
And one of the things about LinkedIn that people find slightly difficult is it doesn't really come with an instruction manual. They understand how to fill out certain pieces of information. They're prompted to do that. But one of the difficulties people have is, they create a profile, it's out there, they think that's great, I've got a nice photograph, I've got a good profile, and then nothing happens.
I'm curious, you're bringing up a point that we see here, especially with individuals who are going through transition or looking for a job. They've lost their job, they need a job. And you also described the rate of growth of LinkedIn. It's now well over 600 million. Why, from your perspective, why do people create a LinkedIn profile?
I think, one of the most important factors.
Or why should they?
Yeah, why should you? Well, I have a kind of three strands to what I always tell people about LinkedIn. The first one is you need to be visible. And online, in terms of visibility, people are going to Google you, or they maybe use other search engines. They might Bing you. Interestingly, Bing is actually becoming more useful as a search tool for people because Bing is owned by Microsoft, and guess what? Microsoft own LinkedIn, and Bing is able to surface more data about what's inside a LinkedIn profile. I have seen some tests where you see a lot more information appearing on a profile just by putting in someone's name. If people meet you, or if they do an interview with you, or if you apply for a job, you can have a cell number, or you can have an email address. But even if you don't add your LinkedIn profile address, it's pretty likely, and it's more prevalent perhaps in the US than it is in other countries. Certainly it's more prevalent than in the UK. But, they're going to Google you. They're going to find out, let's find out a little bit more about this person. And they're probably going to come across your LinkedIn profile if you've created a LinkedIn profile. And what you've got the ability to do with a LinkedIn profile is go beyond what's on your resume or on your CV. You can tell more of a story. You can, put pictures there. You can go into more detail and more depth than you need to do it, or you can do in, a couple of sheets of A4 paper. The resume is constrained by a need for brevity. You've got to convey the main facts about yourself. But with LinkedIn, you've got the opportunity to basically tell a longer story and to get more detailed about certain aspects of what you've done. And one of the key factors about the way that you can use LinkedIn is that you can say things in a different way there. There's a kind of slightly stunted language that seems to have become the norm for a resume, where you'll have lots of bullet points and you'll have short staccato sentences and you'll have active verbs. And it doesn't always translate very well into what you see on LinkedIn. And I usually advise people to differentiate between a resume and LinkedIn in a very simple way of just thinking about it as a completely different function.
That's very good advice.
What I'm trying to say here is that the function of your resume is to describe your suitability for a role, and the function of LinkedIn is to expand upon that. And what you can do, because it's a social network, and you can have recommendations, you can have people endorsing you for skills, you get an element of social proof. So, a resume pops up and you think, this guy looks great, he's got all these, he's got this qualification, he's done that, he's worked here. And then they go to the LinkedIn profile and they see that you've got, 20 recommendations for a role, that you've got lots of endorsements for all the skills that you say you have that are in your resume. So there's an alignment there, and there's a sort of confirmation. So people go to your LinkedIn profile for, in a recruitment way, they'll look at it for more information, for confirmation of saying, is this person who they say they are, and, do they actually stack up? So they get social proof from LinkedIn. The other thing that you get from LinkedIn is obviously something you can never have on a resume, is people can see what your network is like, and they can also see what your interaction with other people is like. They can go and see your activity on LinkedIn. If there's no activity, well, that can be seen as a negative thing. In other words, you're not involved, you're not engaged. But if you've written articles that demonstrate your area of expertise, and if you've interacted with people and give them supportive comments, and again, without pushing yourself down their throats, or your product, if you're in a sort of sales role in a company, you're helping people, and you're showing people that you empathize with their concerns, and so people get a much closer indication from looking at your LinkedIn profile and your activity on LinkedIn of just what kind of person you are. And again, if it's a hiring situation, it helps them to make that decision. There's a lower risk to say, well, I've checked out the LinkedIn profile and everything looks good there, everything looks positive. Let's talk to him, let's have him in and let's have a chat. Whereas if they see a profile where there's very little information, there's no photograph or a bad photograph, and it doesn't seem as if they've taken much care about it, even if you've got a great resume, that's going to count in a negative way.
You also are bringing up an important point. We see here still in the U.S. that individuals don't have a LinkedIn profile. And my sense is, and I hear this at engagements and also anecdotally, if I am recruiting for a position and the candidate doesn't have a LinkedIn profile, there is a good probability that person is going to get passed over, because the recruiters, the managers, they're looking at your social presence, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and being the professional site that it is, not having it can be a detriment, almost as detrimental as having a profile but nothing substantive there for the recruiter, the manager to corroborate.
Absolutely. And, that's not just true in the US, it's certainly the case in the UK. Quite a number of organizations now are recruiting on LinkedIn, and they're using, the very useful feature where you can simply click to apply, and rather than, uploading a resume, it will essentially, it will send your profile to the recruiter, so that, your LinkedIn profile becomes your resume. And it may be the case with some companies that they only recruit on LinkedIn. So if you're not on LinkedIn, you're not going to get hired, full stop. It just won't happen because you're not there.
Very much. That's very true. Very true. I am curious, given the, your evolution from, the advertising and copywriting, now it's the proficiency with LinkedIn. You've worked with many clients over the years, and what I'd love to hear from you is perhaps an anecdote or two about some of the success stories that you've had with your clients. What were their struggles, and how did you help them to resolve why they came to you, and through the using LinkedIn?
Okay. Well, to give one example, the problem they had was that they were very busy and they were very successful, and therefore they'd never really had time to look at their LinkedIn profile. But when they'd reached a certain point in their career and they'd sold a few businesses, they'd exited successfully from them, and they were looking for new things to do. And one of the things that they were interested in doing was doing more talking at conferences and events. And they found me on LinkedIn. That's the channel where most people tend to find me. I create a lot of content on LinkedIn, a lot of articles, and I just try to help people, and I demonstrate my knowledge by giving away my knowledge for free. That's the secret sales sauce that I have. So people see it, they think, yeah, this guy seems to know what he's talking about. Let me set up a call and we'll take it from there. But just this one individual had a specific need, and that he just said, well, what's on my profile doesn't really, it tells the story of what I've done, but it doesn't tell the story of what I want to do next. So essentially, we sat down. We did this by Skype rather than face to face, because he was in another country. But we identified the things he was able to talk about, and they were quite broad, and he had a great deal of expertise. And essentially, we just created a new role for him. We created a company page, which was actually just himself. There's no need for it to be an LCC or a corporation. You can create a company page for yourself as an individual on LinkedIn. And under that heading of the company, we then made him an employee of himself. And we added details of the topics that he would speak about. So we said, speaker on topic X, Y, and Z. And we talked about that specific area that he had expertise in. He'd done a few speaking gigs, and though it wasn't the main focus of what he wanted to do, he realized that it was really good fun, and it was very interesting for him. And, he enjoyed it. It was as simple as that. So he wanted to do more of it. So we took some quotes from some people who, had him speaking, added that to the profile. And I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks after we made the changes to the profile and made it live, that he dropped me a line through LinkedIn and said, I've just been asked to speak at 3 more events. It's working.
That's
People
phenomenal.
See, they see it. We just simply made some simple changes to the profile and changed the language, changed the focus of it, and structurally made a slight change by adding the company page. And the result was he got what he wanted from LinkedIn. He got more of these invitations to speak, and he got more opportunities to tell his story and, essentially enjoy it. Coincidentally, that same individual put me in touch with a number of other people. And a couple of the people that he put me in touch with in order to help them with their profile were broadly in the same situation, in that they were looking for a new position. They've been working for a few years with organizations where, they weren't unhappy, but they were, they thought they could do more. They thought they were maybe worth more, and that they wanted to expand their horizons a little bit, maybe work for slightly larger organizations. And so in both of these cases, it was the same process where we had an interview by Skype or by Zoom, and I basically asked them questions to find out more about what they wanted to do, looked at their skill set, looked at their past experience, looked at some of the material that they used in their resume, or CV as they tend to call them in the UK, and wrote their profiles for them. And it was only actually about 3 or 4 months after I'd written them that I heard. I heard from one of them very quickly and said, hey, just got hired. And, it's done the job that we wanted it to do. He was hired by his, I can't mention any names, but, the dream company in the tech sphere hired him. And the other individual who was recommended to me from, the first guy who was looking to do more speaking, 3 or 4 months later, I heard that the news from him was actually in a tweet that he put out. And his tweet said, hey, David's a genius. These 2 people got 40% more money and got hired as a result of him fixing their LinkedIn profile. I recommend David. And, it was a slightly unconventional way to find out the news, because it's not always the case that people will disclose what their salary rises have been. But, I was able to give people a significant raise in their income and have them working for companies that they really were, aiming to work for. And essentially all I'd done was listen to their story, rewrite it for them, and put it out there. Obviously, the rest of the work is up to them to get that position, to do the interview, to go through that whole process. Those are some examples where the needs were different, but the results were positive and came through, relatively quickly as well. And it's, very satisfying to do that kind of work.
Most definitely. It's very, very satisfying. And I am curious, in 2019, we're just entering their second quarter. I mean, we probably could go on and on about how LinkedIn is going to evolve, but I'm curious how you're going to evolve. Have your ideal clients, your target customers, your audience, is that changing, or is it, anybody that comes to you, that finds you, that expresses an interest and they need help, or are you perhaps changing that formula a little bit, or that recipe a little bit?
Yeah, it has evolved and changed over time. LinkedIn was a hugely different beast in 2006 than it is in 2019. And one thing I have found, even in the last maybe the last 6 months or so, is that rather than having to write everything from scratch and doing what I call the full bypass of a profile, where you've really got to pull it apart and reconstruct it from the ground up.
You've got those medical terms down pat, I can tell.
Yeah. The full profile bypass is major surgery, but it's becoming less and less necessary because people are acquiring the knowledge and they're looking at other people's profile. They're working it out for themselves. They're kind of, they're going on the internet and Googling it like people do for medical advice. You don't always get the best medical advice using Google, I hasten to add, but you'll find out useful things that you can apply yourself. And so what I've found has been more and more the case is that I'm doing microsurgery. I'm just doing a little bit of a tweak to the headline, rewrite the summary, maybe just pay some attention to the way that some of the text is put together, and the language, the tone is, sometimes something that needs to be worked on, especially with someone's trying to transition maybe from one industry to another. You've got to talk about transferable skills. But the nature of it has become that there's more small surgery to be done, and just simple, quick fixes rather than extended major fixes or major changes to what people have on their profile. And in terms of let's say the type of customer, it's great for me because there's huge variety. I don't work in any one particular sector or any one particular industry, even in one particular geographical area. The last count, it was 27 countries. That's the number of different countries I've produced profiles for people who are living in those countries. But one thing that has evolved slightly is that I'm now asked more often to help a company with its approach to LinkedIn rather than just an individual. And often the help will actually involve coaching or training individuals within that company in order to present them better on LinkedIn, so that they may all have little fixes for their profiles, or it may be that there will be a need for some consistency so that all the people, or maybe the key people in a company, are all talking the same language and have an alignment with everyone else's profile, a bit of common text sometimes, so that everyone gets the same message no matter who they're viewing within the company. And sometimes, in kind of small to medium organizations, I've been asked to rewrite everyone's profile, and then they've brought in a photographer, they've done a whole lot of headshots, and then they'll relaunch a company page. Everyone in the company will look good because they'll all have great headshots, and they'll all have an alignment in terms of the industry they're in. I came across a client recently who had about 40 people working for them, and they were working in 12 different industries. They hadn't really thought about this issue in terms of visibility for their customers, but most of their employees were in the wrong industry. So we aligned all of the profiles to be in the same industry. We had some common language and a couple of paragraphs of text which were consistent across all of their profiles, which helps a little bit in terms of search visibility within LinkedIn and beyond LinkedIn. The the work has evolved from, firstly, from more lengthy interventions, if you like, to shorter ones. And also, companies are now becoming more aware of it, and they're investing on behalf of their employees in doing better things on LinkedIn and using it more effectively.
I think that's a wonderful occurrence, because I think many companies don't perceive correctly that their employees, their staff, are their brand ambassadors.
Sure.
And
sure.
by investing not only in themselves as a company to learn how to use LinkedIn, but also to encourage their staff to also want to use LinkedIn too, and to have a nice consistent brand throughout. David, in the time we have together, most definitely want to let our listeners know, if they want to find Dr. LinkedIn, what's the best place to do that, to learn more about you and your work?
Well, go to drlinkedin.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn, obviously, as well. There's a company page for Dr. LinkedIn, so simple typing of Dr. LinkedIn into LinkedIn search engine should surface me. Or obviously, they can just look for me under my name, which is a little bit difficult to spell. It's Petherick. It's P-E-T-H-E-R-I-C-K. If you Google me, you'll find that I kind of dominate the results there, because I've been online since the last millennium. I'm a dinosaur, but I've evolved quite quickly.
Oh yes. Listen, I really appreciate the time you're spending with us. Before I bid you a good night, because I know it's probably 8 or 9 o'clock in the UK right now. We have a little piece at the end of our show. We call them Insights to Go, that we love our guests to share something, a book, an idea, a quote, a success tip, something that they feel our listeners should want to know more, learn more about. So what would be your insight to go for our listeners?
I think very simply, it's be original, and don't go for a convention to describe yourself. Go for a unique way to describe yourself, because everyone's unique. And a lot of people fall into the trap of describing themselves on other people's terms. And I think that's a big mistake, because everyone wants to work with individuals. Nobody wants to work with descriptions or categories or types. So I suppose if I was to summarize it, it's just be yourself, and don't be tempted to water your character down or water your personality down just because you see other people tend to be doing that. You've just got to be proud of who you are, and be proud of your differences as much as anything else.
Fantastic. David, hang on for just a minute while we sign off. Folks, there you have it. David Petherick, Dr. LinkedIn. We're going to put his contact information on our website, so you can certainly check him out on his website, as well as his LinkedIn URL. For my co-host, Randy Ford, this is Howard Fox. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Success Insight Podcast. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there and have a phenomenal day.
Success Insight is a production of Fox Coaching and First Story Strategies. Find us online, successinsightpodcast.com.